Westfield Memorial Hospital provides high-quality health care to residents of Western New York, offering patients the most sophisticated medical advancements while keeping the ease and familiarity of a community hospital. Support for Chautauqua Sunrise has been provided by WRFA 107.9 FM, Jamestown's public radio station, streaming online 24/7 at WRFALP.com. Low power to the people. Chautauqua Sunrise is made possible by a grant from Fredonia Place, a continuing care retirement community providing dignity in a modern luxury environment. Meter's Restaurant, a family tradition for over 50 years in downtown Ripley, is a proud supporter of Chautauqua Sunrise. Meter's provides all-day dining, banquet services, and custom catering, specializing in pie. Funding for Chautauqua Sunrise is provided in part by the Chautauqua County Industrial Development Agency, with offices in Jamestown, Dunkirk, and Westfield, helping businesses to prosper throughout Chautauqua County. From supporting people with disabilities to enjoy great lives to providing health care services that are available to anyone, the Resource Center has been improving our county for more than 60 years. Learn more about how the Resource Center makes a positive difference in people's lives. From the Access Chautauqua Studios in Mayville, it's Chautauqua Sunrise. Chautauqua Sunrise is hosted by Doc Hamels and supported by the award-winning volunteers at Access Chautauqua. We are here to share local news, colorful interviews, and events of interest to everyone. Chautauqua Sunrise is broadcast live Saturday mornings each week from 9 to 10 a.m. Send events via email or call us live. Check us out on YouTube and Facebook. And now, from the Access Chautauqua Studios, it's Chautauqua Sunrise.
Good morning, everybody, and welcome back to Chautauqua Sunrise. I'm Doc Hamels, and today is a very special edition of Chautauqua Sunrise in that we are pre-taping. We're here to accommodate my guest schedule, and so we're actually back here in February, but we're going to be talking to you today in March. Woo, back to the future. So because of that, we're not live. Please don't call in to ask a question or make a comment or whatever. You always can call here and leave a message, and we'll get you on next week. And the number is 716-753-5225. You always go to our Facebook page. You can Twitter us, you can email us, you can do all those sorts of things. If you have a question about today's show or you have some community announcement, we'll get it on for you for sure. I want to say good morning to, of course, everybody's watching us right now on Spectrum 1301. And I want to say good morning to anybody in the world, because you know we stream live everywhere. Also, I want to say good afternoon to my listeners on WRFA 107.9, low power to people in Jamestown on Tuesdays at 1 o'clock. Thanks for listening in. We have a show today. We're going to be talking about a lot of various artifacts that we have here on my table, but you can't see them, but we're going to describe them to our very best. And if you want to see what they look like, go to YouTube and check out this show there, and you can watch the whole thing and you can see what we're talking about, because it's going to be a really cool show in store for you. Okay, just a few quick things that I want to share with you, and then we're going to get right to my guest, who's anxiously waiting in the wings here. Want to mention that St. Patrick's Day is coming up. It'll be just about a year when the whole world closed down because of COVID, and I'm hoping here in February that many of us have already gotten our vaccines or we're getting close to it. It's been a little bit, confusing to figure out how we're going to get our vaccines, but I'm very hopeful from what I've been reading that we will have clinics set up by now and that people will get vaccine. But nonetheless, many of you all want to go to your St. Patrick's Day get-togethers, and please, please, please don't use that as a super spreader. Wear your mask, use your social distancing. If you're going to have a party, keep it at home, or at least do it in a responsible manner. Enough on that. Also, I mentioned in the past that my Westfield Mayville Rotary Club is collecting Christmas cards, new ones and not used ones. So we don't want ones that I've already got, from Aunt Essie or anything like that. We just want ones that you don't want to use, or maybe you didn't necessarily care for. I'm saying that carefully, but or that you just want to come up with a new batch this year. We use them at Christmas time to send cards to those that are invalids, that are at home, to the nursing homes, to our friends at the VA hospitals and so forth, and clinics and centers, Meals on Wheels. So we're collecting these cards now so we can get it ready for Christmas. And remembering what I said in the past, this past year we distributed 2,000 cards, and the year before 1,800. So this is a growing project that we're proud of, and if you know any Rotarians in the Westfield, Mayville, Ripley, Brockton area, you can get the cards to them, or you can call this number, 736-4255. That's my Rotary number at home, and you can let me know how I can pick up the cards. Or call us here at the station again, 753-5225, and we'll make some arrangements there too. All right, I have no real announcements other than that because we're in the future and I don't have any future announcements to share with you. But I will say this much as far as the show today. This is a topic in a gentleman that I have been kind of pestering for the last few years, and we just haven't quite coordinated. I always think of it too late or something comes up. And we are going to talk with Dr. David Brown, who is steeped deeply in the whole history of the Civil War and here in the Chautauqua County area, especially Westfield, Ripley, Brockton, Portland area. Good morning, Dave, and welcome to the show.
Well, thank you.
Two doctors in the same house here.
Yeah, yeah.
Dave, when I said that, I was really honest. I've been trying to get you on the show. I think I contacted you a few times, and we just haven't quite made it. And I really have been enjoying talking with you. We've already compared some notes. Now, me as a town historian, and you've opened my eyes hugely to the amount of people, the men and women that served in the Civil War right here.
Yeah. Right
here, right where we're sitting when we go home and back at our hometowns. And I'm fascinated. But before we get there, can you tell us a little bit about yourself? Because people like to know these things. And then, how did you get involved with all this?
Well, I spent 40 years of my life teaching.
And survived.
Yeah, survived. 5 years in Illinois, where I met my wife, who was teaching in that district, and then 35 years teaching in Sherman.
Are you from Illinois?
No, basically Cleveland, Ohio.
Oh.
But my father grew up in Westfield, and he was a surgeon in the war in the Navy, and at the end of the war he went to Cleveland to practice, so we grew up in Cleveland. And almost every weekend, he'd load us up in this old Ford station wagon, and we would drive to Westfield. Took 4.5 hours.
Yeah.
There was no 90 then. And took 20 all the way. And he would work. That's how he burned off steam. He would work on the farm where we now live, which was owned by my great uncle and built by my great uncle in 1880 something. And so as a result, I got to know a lot of the kids in the summers here. I went to camp in the woods. And so there's many people in Westfield who think I grew up there, actually, just because I was there so much. But we had a farm in Sherman. We moved from Illinois to Sherman in 1973, my wife and I. And she was pregnant with our first son. And eventually we had 4 sons. And we had a beef and sheep farm there. And I really had no great interest in the Civil War at the beginning, but my father, he got the bug kind of later in life too. He was probably around 60 and got very interested, and found this group of friends in Westfield, and they went down to Gettysburg. And one of his good buddies was Don Ryberg. And Don was a social studies teacher who became probably one of the #1 collectors anywhere in the area. He was and so knowledgeable. And so I got bit when I was talking to him years ago, and he kind of got me started. And what I discovered was that the more you know you don't know. And then I became interested in reenacting. We had a group at Moore Park, and it was led by a fellow named Tim Cummings, works for the town of Chautauqua, and his boys were involved, his wife was involved, and there were others, the DeJoes from Brockton. And as a result, you know, I talked to him about wanting to be a part of it, but I had no experience. So he said, well, we need a first lieutenant. And I said, well, wouldn't you normally have to like go through the ranks?
Yeah,
and he said, well, in this case, he said, the problem we have is if we go to a reenactment, a big one, he said, if we do not have an officer, they can make us join them. And he said, we've had to actually join infantry units before in reenacting. He said, and we don't like it. So I became a first lieutenant, and I've been learning after the fact. But I feel a little bit like the little dummy that sits on the arm, because Tim still gives all the orders. He's the master sergeant. Well, actually, his son took over as master sergeant, but he's still sergeant. His son Mitch got very involved, and since he was a little boy, and the only thing that messed him up coming to a couple of reenactments was he was actually in the military. And we have several guys that are in the military one way or another, and he ended up going to Chechnya to train people in how to use a certain pistol. It was crazy. But he's very knowledgeable about the 9th, but he's always trying to find out, when did they have this? When did they have that?
Yeah, you know, the chronology of it all,
Yeah. And my interest from the very beginning, because of Don Ryberg, was Civil War letters and actual artifacts that could, you know, form a history.
Tells the story,
Yeah. And at the same time, I became very involved with the Chautauqua County Historical Society in Westfield at the McClurg Museum. And we have a pretty good Civil War collection there, actually. And so my goal is basically to end up, my artifacts will probably go there. It's a very big issue to me that things should go where they belong, and thus the saber. But and this is one of the odd things about COVID, it kind of stuck us away in the house, and so I decided I would make use of that, and I have been going through my collection of Civil War letters and discovering packets of letters that I hadn't seen in a number of years. And so I spent the time to, first I copy them completely as a PDF, then I copy them page by page as JPEGs.
Oh my gosh.
Then I transcribe into Word the letter, which is sometimes a challenge. However, many of these guys were incredibly neat with their cursive, which just slays me that children today aren't necessarily getting cursive, and that
it was almost an art form when I look at some of the letters.
Absolutely. And so, which brings me to kind of another part of my history. I think I mentioned to you at one time that my grandparents started Highlights in 1946.
That's a children's magazine, right?
Yes, yes. And actually it's still going. My nephew Kent is the CEO. My brother Kent a lot of Kents in our family. My brother Kent was the editor for probably 25 years. And my brother Gary is a vice president in Columbus, still working with the company. And so the company is still very active. But we still sell a lot of magazines to kids. Our mission is kids getting things to kids and helping them to read and helping them to think. So we also happen to have a subsidiary called Zahner and Blosser, and one of the things they have is a handwriting series.
Yes.
And so I always enjoyed that. And when we were kids, everybody learned cursive.
You had those green cards with the white or manila
Around
colored
the room.
letters all
Yeah.
around the blackboard. Yep. I used those materials when I taught.
So now it's tougher. Like if I take one of my letters and show it to one of my grandkids, they might be able to figure it out, but it's tough. I mean, they've had some cursive, but maybe not as much as they could. But I worry about this is going to end up being like the Navajo Indians to the Second World War.
Yeah, the code.
With codes, yeah. And you kind of hope not, but.
Okay. Dave, before we go too much further, can you kind of set us historically now, the Civil Wars in the 1860s and the 9th Cavalry and how that all came about? It kind of, because I think going forward that this will kind of bring the listeners and viewers to where we are.
Well, there was a fellow named Colonel Beardsley who began to put together this cavalry. He had been empowered by the governor to do that, and it started out with companies from Westfield, Ripley, Brockton, Sherman, around the county, and then some in Cattaraugus. There were some companies added later that were, I believe they were from up near Albany. But basically, they were mustered in Westfield, meaning they all got together and signed up for the service.
Okay.
And they were in a camp called Camp Seward, named after our Secretary of State. And they had a camp that was, if you're familiar at all with Westfield, Bliss Road, which
I do.
I live at the end of Bliss. If you walk from my house down Bliss about 1,000 feet, they were on the right, and Union was a divider, and Bliss was a divider, or the edges. And I found that out with the help of Michelle Henry, our county historian.
She was just on the show a few weeks ago.
Super. Excellent, excellent historian. And she looked up all the deeds to all the land out there from the 1860s. And so she was able to, with me, go over them and figure out what was the Chautauqua Fairgrounds. And it was called the Fairgrounds, and some people thought that the Welch Field was the fairgrounds, but not so. It was on the other side of Bliss. And it makes sense because they had a stream there. You got to have water.
Your horses, yeah.
They didn't have horses there. It's possible that a few officers had some horses there, but
okay. So this is where these guys, they sign up their name on the paperwork, and this is where they report from here on out.
Yep.
And get trained?
About September 9th, I think, was the day they started.
1861?
1861,
Yeah, right.
yeah.
See, I did my homework.
So the war had actually started. So basically they drilled. They had 20 old muskets that they were given by the state of New York. And that was what they learned how to...
Some things never changed.
No, no.
Here's some computers.
Yeah. So they had the muskets, and then if I can read
sure.
This is from the Westfield Republican of October 30th, 1861.
Okay.
So they're in camp. It says a large portion of the uniforms for the soldiers in Camp Seward have been received. They consist of a light blue armcloth pants, dark blue jackets, woolen shirts, woolen socks, fatigue caps, brogans. These are brogans.
That's a shoe.
Yes.
Or boot, shoe boot.
Well, it's a shoe basically.
A brogan.
And infantry, this is what they wore all the time. Cavalry had these, but then once you got horses, you used cavalry boots.
Now, is this a real one? This is the real deal?
It's an actual reproduction.
This is a heavy shoe.
Yeah.
It's got like a metal thing on the heel, and it's got like nails in there. This doesn't look very comfortable to me.
They're not terribly comfortable. Well, they break in. But you bring up a good point, though, about uniforms. I'm wearing the uniform of a first lieutenant, and almost all of me is authentic. I am not authentic. I'm way too old. I mean,
too young.
Well, there would not have been people my age. The oldest guy
I see what you're saying. Yeah.
Yeah, the oldest guy I can think of was this Pap Green, and he was in his 60s. And they called Lee the old man, and he was 50, 55, 57. Right. So their concept of old was different.
Right.
So for somebody to be older would have been rare.
A lot of these guys mustering in would have been in their late teens, early 20s, in that range probably.
Yeah, I think the average was somewhere in the neighborhood of 19, 18, 19.
Young boys.
And they were small. That's another
Short
thing.
Guys.
When you look at the uniforms, most of them are small, maybe like 140-pound guys. And
oh, good Lord.
5'8" would have been very typical. So anyway, in this Camp Seward, they were given their first things. They had to go through an inspection by the surgeon, and the surgeon was John Spencer of Westfield, and his assistant was Dr. Bennett of Ripley.
Oh yeah.
Yep.
I've seen his name.
He was the assistant surgeon of the regiment, and a number of things. It's kind of funny. There were about half tents and half barracks. So they did have some wooden barracks there. And the paper has some references to, on snowy nights, the people that lived around there would take the guys from their tents and let them stay with them.
How many guys are we talking here?
Well, there was
Ballpark.
Probably 800.
800 people are on that campground.
Yeah.
Holy mackerel! I didn't know it was anything like that.
When I was a kid, that whole area turned into grapes. But it was, it was an open area, and it was used by many people.
Okay.
And as a fairgrounds. And there was a horse track either right near it, or it may have been integrated on one side of it. But there's a reference to the soldiers watching a race, which was kind of interesting.
The question just came in, how many acres would you say?
Oh,
ballpark.
I would guess 20.
Okay. And so you have 800 guys mustered together. They're learning to be a soldier. But this is the cavalry. Now, do they all ride horses?
Well, what they do is what we do in our reenactment group. We actually go through various drills that are cavalry drills. So we don't do the same pattern as infantry. And we have a certain way, for instance, that we fire in echelon, where every other guy goes forward so many paces, and they drop to their knees, and they fire, and the group behind them comes through them, drops down, and they keep doing that. And as a result of that, you've got one guy holding a horse, where everybody's in fours. So one guy's holding all the horses, and the other three go to fire. And it was an extremely effective method. They were using carbines when they finally got carbines. And the carbines were single shot primarily. They didn't get Spencers till late 1863, and they didn't all get those. That's a 7-shot repeater. But the single shots mostly were Sharps, and many were a gun called Sharps and Hankins. It was unusual. From all I've read, my opinion is that it was certainly one of the best. The Sharps was way more popular, but the Sharps had a linen or a paper cartridge, where the I don't know if you can.
Yeah, we can zoom in.
This is a page out of the front book of the history of the 9th New York Cavalry, and if you can see the carbine that's there, he spelled, it's really Sharps and Hankin. But I do want you to notice that there's a ring in the wooden stock.
I see it.
Okay, so that caused me almost a year to try to figure out how there was a ring in that stock, because there were never guns made that way from Sharps and Hankins. What we determined later was that the fellow that owned this, which was Captain Newell Cheney, who wrote the history of the 9th, actually, we think he took it off a McClellan's saddle, a piece of hardware, and did it himself.
A little customization there.
Absolutely. Most of the Sharps and Hankins on the metal side, the saddle ring was welded to it. So troopers wore a strap, a heavy strap that came across their chest, and it had a hook on it, and they could literally hook onto the cavalry carbine and flip it over their shoulder. So when they're riding their horse, it's behind them.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Wow.
And they carried a saber, which wasn't the most effective thing in the world, but I do have a number of letters that talk about hitting somebody in the head with a saber. And the idea, by the way, was not necessarily to kill an opponent, but to wound them to the point where somebody had to go help them. Because then you've got 2 guys out of the battle instead of 1. So it's kind of an odd little thing there. Our guys, when they got their pistols, finally, they were .44 caliber Colts. And I carry, it's not actually in here, but in the,
That's okay.
little water thing there. This is a belt that any one of the guys wears. So it's got your pistol, you've got a cartridge box, you've got a box for the caps. The caps, these are single shot, not single shot. They're not a cartridge. You have to load the gun. So you're at reenactments. We actually use to fill it. We put the powder in the chamber, cram it down, and then we use cream of wheat. And we fill it to the top, and we cram the cream of wheat down, and then we take some grease and go around the top of the cylinder,
Seal it.
so it won't flash back to other cylinders when you fire. But these were 6-shot, and these were, I think they were very effective for the cavalry. Of course, you're firing off a horse.
So if you were in battle, you'd have that on. You had your rifle hooked to you, and you have your saber as well?
Yeah. But,
wow.
But that's a trooper. Now, I would not have.
Oh.
I would have had my saber, but any officers, they just have their saber and a pistol.
Okay.
But they didn't carry, normally, they didn't carry a carbine.
Okay.
So.
And this is while you're on a horse?
While you're on a horse?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I'll tell you.
I couldn't have done that job.
Well, I've often thought about that. I mean, I've ridden since I was little, and yet I think in terms of a guy who's 140 pounds, wielding a saber, or being able to get to a pistol. I mean, those pistols are heavy. A .44 is a fairly heavy pistol. Now, officers, mine is .36 caliber, and many officers had those that are lighter, just a little bit lighter, which makes things a little easier. This is a haversack that men would have carried. They put all their personal items in there.
So it looks
to carry.
So we would call that what they call
like
those
a knapsack.
A knapsack, but you have that on your back or on your side or
on your back?
On your back.
Well, it would hang down to the side.
Okay.
This is a canteen, and I can almost guarantee you that every guy would have carried his canteen because they needed water.
Okay.
Everything I have is reproduction here. When I reenact, I don't take any of my items that are authentic, like the saber here. When I actually went to training at Gettysburg one time for reenacting, and I had an 1863 saber with me. And the guy looked at me, he said, "Are you stupid?" And I
No, I'm
I said,
Dave.
yeah. I said, wow. I was pretty intimidated.
Yeah, I guess.
But basically he said, you don't ever bring something that valuable to reenactment. And he's absolutely right. I mean, I've learned that. The troopers would have worn these. This is a kepi. So this has on it 9 and F at the bottom because we're Company F.
9th Cavalry, Company F. So
and then the cross sabers are cavalry.
Cool. So that would be sort of like the typical little hat that you would see the Union soldiers wearing in all the stories that we read as kids.
Yeah.
Okay, we're going to take a little breather, and when we come back, I want to talk about the saber that's here and how it was used. So, folks, stay tuned. We're going to be right back. We're going to take a little break, and this is for you, okay? Stay tuned.
My part-time service in the Army National Guard makes it possible for me to be more for the community I call home. I'm a better neighbor because my service has taught me how important it is to be a team player. My training helps me in my classes when I must give attention to detail to the task at hand. My service in the Army National Guard allows me to keep my community and those I care about safe from threats. Learn more about how you too can live and serve part-time close to home by visiting nationalguard.com.
Chautauqua Sunrise, I'm Doc Hamels, and my very special guest today is Dr. David Brown, who is talking about the 9th Cavalry out of the Westfield area from the Civil War, and we're talking about all kinds of cool things. And we're going to talk about horses and sabers here right now. So we'll talk about horses.
Okay, the 9th Cavalry,
Whoop, hang on a second. No, that's all right. We have a little, the clip is on your shirt there. Go ahead.
The 9th Cavalry left Westfield at the first week of November and went to Buffalo, where they were received. I don't know if I'm going to get that in.
Okay, hang on. We'll have an assistant come in here. Okay, while we're doing that, let me just jump in here for a second. Okay. Folks, what we're doing is we're talking about the Civil War from a historical point of view, and Dave hasn't said this yet, but if you have stories, family stories, if you have letters from the Civil War and you want to make copies or something like that, you know, your town historians are really interested in those kinds of things, and I'm sure Dave would be too, and he's going to speak to that a little bit later in the show. All right, back to you now that you've got your
repaired.
wardrobe fixed.
I've got my official Civil War microphone on.
I just got a word too. If you want to tip your hat back, you look right now. You sort of all I can see is.
I could actually take it off.
There you go. All right.
All right.
All right.
So I did want to say something about the horses. Horses in general in the Civil War, estimates are that over 1 million horses died in the Civil War. Over 1 million. And when you figure an artillery battery is a whole slew of horses just in that alone.
Wow.
And our reenactors are a member of what is referred to as a remount camp. People kid us sometimes that we don't have our horses and so on. Well, we don't have our horses just like they didn't in remount camps because horses were killed. They died of malnutrition. These guys sometimes were in the saddle for a week.
Wow.
And they had nothing to eat for the soldiers or the horses. Mm-hmm. And so obviously it was pretty tough on the horses.
Yeah.
But so the 9th Cavalry were supposed to have their horses when they got to, first they thought Albany, then they went down to Washington and went to a Camp Fenton, and named after Reuben Fenton. And when they got there, there were no horses. And they divided up the companies. I think it was 4 companies. 4 companies were assigned to artillery, and 8 companies were assigned to as being train guards. I can tell you they were not happy. I have many actual letters from soldiers where they talk about they didn't sign up for this, they were going to get out of the service, they had been cheated, and actually the company I reenact with, Company F, actually mutinied in March, at the end of March in 1862. Or it was called a mutiny, but in reality, the whole 9th Regiment was marching, and the F Company was in the front, and they just stopped. And when officers came up and said, what's going on? They said, look, you said we were going to have horses. There's no horses. We're not moving till we get horses. So the officers went back and got another company, actually an Irish company, and brought them forward, and they started the thing again going, the line, and then the Group F followed, but they were just very upset. There is a record of some of those guys leaving the service.
You know, because after you and I talked, I did look in the records of some of the various soldiers from the area, and I saw that, and I don't know if it said disillusioned or disinterested or something, and I thought, and I scratched my head about it because it was early in the year, so I'll bet that had something to do with that.
Yeah, well, they'd been promised horses, so Fenton and some other people of renown at the time were arguing for them with Stanton, the Secretary of War. And McClellan called them cowards and wanted them drummed out of the service. And then another officer who was an artillery officer came forward and said, these are the bravest men I've ever seen. He said, I was having a rebel charge coming at me. And he said, the guys from the 9th manned, when my own artillery guys were shot, they manned the guns and saved the day.
Wow.
He said, don't call them cowards.
So these are people from Westfield, Ripley,
absolutely,
Mayville area. Wow,
yeah, absolutely,
great story.
So then it's now at the end of May, and Stanton has to make a decision. Does he take the whole regiment and take them out of the service, or does he give them the horses? Well, he chose to give them the horses. So at the very end of June, they're issued horses. And then I read another letter, and it talks about how they had to break the horses. So I'm thinking these aren't even horses that were, you know, I'm sure that they'd been green broke, what we used to call green broke, but they had a lot of work to do with them. And once they got the horses, then they began to get other accoutrements. I think they already had their sabers, but the 9th Cavalry went on to serve in 141 engagements.
Holy mackerel.
They were absolutely highly decorated. Many people think at Gettysburg that they kind of saved the day, they and the rest of the cavalry. But the way they were able to do that shooting I talked to you about slowed down Heath's Confederates. And first shots fired at Gettysburg were from a fellow named Alpheus Hodges, who was from F Company.
Okay.
And he saw some rebels, and it was 5:30 in the morning, 5 or 5:30, and they shot at him, and he shot back. Another fellow from an Illinois company at 7 o'clock shot, and he always said he was the first shot because he was a lieutenant, and that's how it comes down, the lieutenant versus the private. But the guy that really shot first was Alpheus Hodges.
Okay.
And then first prisoner taken was by the 9th Cavalry, and the first person killed at Gettysburg in the battle was a 9th Cavalry guy.
So
also.
local guys were right on the scene. So I said we were going to talk about this saber here. So as it goes, you donated to the Historical Society, which is my office. So why did you do that? Because there's a connection to Ripley, right?
Exactly. I purchased that, maybe a year ago. And I began to study the guy a little bit, Milton Goodrich. And I really didn't know a lot about him. There's an Ed Goodrich who was a Medal of Honor winner. He's from Brockton. And is he a cousin?
I could not find him in the records for Ripley.
Well, Goodriches grow on trees, evidently, in this area. But in any case, that saber belonged to Captain Milton Goodrich, and I have in the November 13th Westfield Republican, it mentions that in the 2nd Battalion, M.P. Goodrich, which was our Milton, was the adjutant, battalion adjutant. And he started, I believe, as a lieutenant, first lieutenant, but quickly moved to captain.
That's right. Yeah.
So he actually carried this, and he also carried this at Gettysburg.
So Someone asked me, would this have been in battle?
Very likely it was.
And he may have done harm with this, right?
Could have.
Okay.
Could
well,
have.
we don't know.
He maybe he negotiated. I don't know. But,
Okay, so
yeah.
the backstory on this one that I discovered in my archives was that he had a younger brother named James who came in as a corporal under him when they all mustered together. And then there was this other fella that was like the assistant to the surgeon, or he was working in the medical corps with the Cav, the 9th Cavalry, and he had this, he only went by initials. And some people know him as B.F. Goodrich. And he ended up being an assistant surgeon, and he traveled right along with his two cousins. So that when I looked at that, I go, wow, this is just way cool. Here you got these guys. Milton was older, and James was in the middle, and I think B.F. was the youngest. But they all kind of hung together, and they're all from Ripley. And just for those of you listening from Ripley, the homestead was down just past the laundromat on the right. I believe the building is still there, but the Goodriches are long-standing settlers of Ripley, and these guys all came from that area on the right side of Route 20. And Milton, after the war, went in industry, was a lawyer at a cheese factory, all kinds of stuff. But cool stuff.
Yeah.
And thanks for returning that to Ripley. That was, people have been very proud to see that I've shown them to.
Well, it's the right place for it to be. I guess one of the things that I learned from Don Ryberg, he talked a lot about trying to get things back to where they go. That's why I tried to buy as much Chautauqua County stuff that he had. I thought actually about cashing in my teacher retirement from Illinois and trying to buy everything he had. But my wife just couldn't understand that. I don't know.
Couldn't get around that.
But I did. I got a tremendous amount of stuff from Don, and I've never been sorry. He was such a great guy.
So folks that are listening and watching right now, Dave, and they have stuff, what do they do with the stuff, especially that belongs locally? What should they do with it?
Well, really, I've heard people say, I know my kids will like this. They're going to find out that some kids might, and some kids couldn't care less. But if they want things to be kept safely, I'll just show you real quickly what I do. Yep. Actually, let me show you in this one is a guy, this is one of my favorite things. This fellow, I don't know if you can get.
Yep, he's coming in on you. Here we go.
This was Casimir Churchill.
All right, there's his saber.
Yep, killed during the war. I own that picture as well. So I put identifying information first. So this tells about Casimir and so on. And then this is the transcription. I do that next. So that's a full transcription of this particular letter. And then I make the copies I mentioned earlier, the PDFs, and then the JPEGs. And so we have these one after another. And I've been going through, I'm way over 100 letters.
So where do you get these?
Well, most of them I purchased, some from eBay, some from private collectors. I used to go to the Mansfield paper show every year, and they have people that have groups of letters there. I've had people give me letters. David Carnahan. David, I'll bet for 30 years he had told me that he had this group of letters. And finally, about maybe 3 or 4 years ago, he called me and he said he was leaving his office of Carnahan Jackson Foundation. He was kind of retiring out, and he came across the letters, and they were in a Civil War wooden box.
Oh my gosh.
He said there must be at least 20 of them. Well, it turned out there were 110. And I turned that over to one of our board members, Pam Brown, who works a lot with Michelle Henry, and she transcribed all of those letters. And I just couldn't. It was just too much. But it's an incredible collection of letters.
So as far as the originals, if someone's listening, go, well, we're never going to give up these things. They're going to stay in the family. But you could get a facsimile. You could get a Xerox copy.
Absolutely. We can do that. And On the other hand, I would encourage people, if they want to keep them, that's fine. If they have a way to keep them, when we get these letters, the originals, now you saw how I had mine, but when these go to the museum, they will transfer those into acid-free paper in layers. Okay. But basically, it's the real goal is to get all of this on the internet. And that's my golden grail. So the College of William and Mary, I found a whole slew of Casimir's letters there, and they basically turned them into public domain. And the way they have it set up on is great. So once you have these on the internet, they're researchable by anybody. And you know, for your family members, they're always going to be able to see them. And there's another fellow who, his name is William Griffing. And I first learned about him, I bought a couple of letters that I own from eBay, and I discovered he had them published up on the internet. Now, wait a minute, I just bought these. Well, it turns out he had this thing going where he would get dealers to give him the letters, and he would research them, transcribe them, then give them back, and then they'd sell them. At first that bothered me until I thought about, well, what's the ultimate goal? So instead, the guy's kind of now my hero. And there's a website, I don't know how I could get that to you, but it's Billy Yank something. But if you go to that website, he literally has hundreds of Civil War letters by state, by regiment, and so he has 5 or 6 Ninth Cavalry letters. He has 1/12th, and just to add real quick, Westfield had a lot of fellows who were in the 1/12th, the 49th, the 100th, the 44th, so they weren't just all, and the 154th, which is mostly Cattaraugus. So it wasn't just the 9th Cavalry. It's just that the 9th Cavalry's camp was in Westfield, and that's it's 1,000 feet from my house. I mean, how can you beat that?
So a question just came through, and I've done this with my own son because he was in the military for over 25 years. I used to say, all right, you talk about company, you talk about regiment, you talk about wing, you talk about blah, 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 blah. So how does this all work? So can you work from the bottom up? What's the smallest unit?
If I can remember.
Your best guess.
The trooper would be first.
All right. So
and then the ranks. In cavalry, then there's a group of 4, and then you have squadrons. You have, which are, toward the end of the war, a typical squadron was maybe 20 or 30 guys.
So, okay.
Mostly because they were killed out. And then you would have your company.
Okay.
And when companies went into the war, they were almost always 100 men or more.
So they would have a flag with F on it.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's, you could see where your company was, right?
Yep. And
so you got 100 guys from the Ripley, Westfield, Mayville area, Company F, 9th Cav.
And
but
toward the end of the war,
company.
it would have been less guys. But
so how many companies would have been in the 9th?
There were 12 companies.
Wow.
Originally, like 1,200 guys. It's A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, and then it skips J. You don't find J's. I think it was because in handwriting it looks like an I.
Yeah.
So anyway, so it goes on to, after you got the squadron and the regiment, then you go to a brigade.
Oof.
And a brigade might have been 3 to 4. They kind of changed that mixture different times to form a brigade. So you had a brigade commander. And then, let's see, after the brigade, it would go to a corps.
Oh, wow.
And then army. So
yeah.
Even the cavalry was part of the army, ultimately. They were like a wing of the army.
Well.
Pretty important one. It took the cavalry, though, the first, I would say, 2.5 years of the war, the cavalry got kicked pretty good. The Confederate cavalry, they were better riders, they were equestrians, and they outfought the Union for the most part. And Gettysburg, about that time, things changed. And the battle at East Cavalry Field, which was between Jeb Stuart, having come back, who he thought he could beat anybody, and he went against Custer and the Michiganders, and that was an incredible battle.
Now, I've been to Gettysburg, and that's probably one of the spookiest places I've ever been. Sorry, it is spooky.
It is.
I can't explain why I say that. All I know is when I'm there, it had a very odd feel to it. But there's a memorial there for the 9th, I believe.
Oh yeah, yep. It's a beautiful memorial, and they place those roughly at the center of where the 9th Cavalry stood.
Okay, that makes more sense, because I didn't know why all these things were there, so that makes sense.
That brings up another thing. In the 1880s, there was a commission formed that had to make judgments on the different monuments around Gettysburg. And that's the point at which Alpheus Hodges and his shot, they ruled in his favor against the other fellow, the lieutenant, I think Jones. I wipe his name out of my mind. But they ruled that Alpheus Hodges was in fact the first guy. But we go every year, and we get a different tour guide every year. And the young lady in the last year we went started talking about this Jones lieutenant who made the first shot. And I said, oh, they probably make you say that. Oh, big mistake. She got so angry. She said, nobody tells me what to say.
Whoa.
But ultimately, her reasoning was that Alpheus Hodges was firing back where the lieutenant was firing. If somebody could explain that to me, but
offense defense type of thing.
Yeah, I guess. But ultimately, they usually publish that the fellow from Illinois was the first shot, even though our whole group knows that that's not true. But I've had a ball doing this, and I have T.J. Brown. Do you know Tom Brown from Westfield? Tom is a consummate warrior. He was in the service, served at the end of Vietnam, and served in the Desert Wars. And I've never seen this happen. When he was in his low 50s, they called him back, and because he was still in the reserve, he went back, and I can't tell you exactly what he did, but gung-ho guy. He gave me a collection of letters for the museum. It took me nearly a year to get done, but I transcribed all of those letters.
Wow.
And they're from a lot of Sherman guys, Westfield guys. The one guy in Sherman, I don't know if you knew Perry Dewey.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, Perry, this was Perry's great-grandfather, Tyler Dewey, and he was the blacksmith.
Oh,
and then he got graduated to farrier. And I never thought about that. But every company had to have...
Oh, the supporting actors, the cooks, the farriers, the medics, everything, Dave, you got some gloves here. Can you? I don't want to miss that.
Yeah, every cavalryman carried his gauntlets, and the gauntlets serve a number of purposes.
That's what you called those?
Gauntlets? Yep, because of the tail here on them, basically.
I did not know that.
This guards your wrist. And then an actual saber that they carried would have had a leather piece that went on the point and then around their wrist.
Okay.
And then it would help them hold on. The other thing these were good for, if you're firing your carbine, it would help control the heat because the barrel of the carbine would get very hot. So they used, these were very important.
I suppose even holding on to your, the bridle and the horse and all, all the paraphernalia, your hands would get torn up pretty well. Dave, I'm curious about these letters. Who were they to, and what did they talk about?
In this case, let's just take Casimir, which I showed you, but most of his letters are to home. And typically, he was very religious, and many of the letters I have, they talk about, if I'm taken, I'm ready, God will take me. And his letters are particularly so. And I had this one out for some reason, but I guess I would just say he wrote to his father many times, and he had sisters, and he was in a charge against a rebel group, and they were charging for the second time, and it was Casimir and several other guys. They charged, and then all of a sudden a whole slew of rebel cavalry came out. So there was no way they could do anything. So they wheeled around and came back, and one fellow was killed on the spot, and Casimir was shot in the lower back. And I have in this group a letter from his sergeant who helped him off his horse, and he said, "Boys, I'm hit." And they helped him down, and he died within a day. So the sergeant writing home says to the father, he was hit in the kidneys, Kidnees. He was hit in the kidneys, and I have the bullet that killed your son. And that just gave me chills. And eventually they sent the bullet to the father, and he talks about it in a letter. He repeats the letters he gets, which is really interesting, in those letters that he writes to his daughters. And he says, I have the bullet that killed your brother. His brother was also in the 1st Sharpshooters, which they came out of the 112th in Jamestown, but many of them were local guys.
Now, it's my understanding that many of the guys didn't die because of the actual battle, but because of infection and diphtheria or whatever it was. It had nothing to do with the actual battle.
Diarrhea literally killed more soldiers than bullets.
Wow.
They had typhoid, measles. There was a number of things that they had to fight with. I came across some incredible letters from one fellow that referred to sending home scabs to his family. And evidently, people really in the know would literally send a scab, and they would scratch it. They did vaccination, but they had to know. There's very few people that understood that. But there is a story about one regiment where the guy, regiment, and the commanding officer wanted all of his guys inoculated. I'm pretty sure it was for typhoid. And many didn't want to do it, even some officers. He had them held down and did it. And his was the only one that did not get sick.
Wow.
So yeah, sickness was way worse. We read about guys getting measles. You don't think about that as being deathly, but it can be, and many died from measles.
Dave, we're down to a minute and a half. I know it seems hard to believe, but I want to give you the opportunity to either share contact information or what you're looking for once again, and what's coming up for the Cav reenactment.
Well, when we can get back together again, we'll try to have an encampment again in Moore Park. Anybody trying to get a hold of me can get a hold of me through the Chautauqua County Historical Society, or I have no fear of giving out my email. Is that a bad idea? DS Brown, as in David Stewart Brown, dsbrown@aol.com. And I'd be tickled pink to hear from anybody. If you were interested in parting with letters, that's possible, or if you just wanted them copied, or sometimes you have family information, you can fill in things that are phenomenal.
Is there any particular person you're looking for right now?
Well, I just got a whole group of information. Yeah, I'd like to find out more. I'd like to see if there's any letters from Goodrich.
Okay.
And then also, we know Orrin Grover. If we can find out somewhere in the extended family, that's a local family, of whoever has that actual photograph of Orrin standing there with his Sharps and Hankins.
Okay.
I'm hoping to zoom in on the picture, and the copies that I have, I can't do that on.
All right. Well, Dave, we're just about out of time.
Yep, so it's been great.
Dr. David Brown, Civil War historian, reenactor, cool guy.
Yeah.
Folks, I hope you enjoyed the show. We just scratched the surface on this topic. It is so fascinating to look back and know what our role was in the Civil War here locally. So I want to thank you, Dave, for joining us, and maybe come back another time or bring some of the guys from the reenactment group. Folks, we're going to do this all again next week. Meanwhile, be safe. St. Patrick's Day is coming up. And I hope that you're well and you've gotten your vaccine by now. I'm Doc Hamels signing off. See you next time. Bye now.